The patrons have spoken and we shall fulfill their wish. Next up is Alomomola. Astonishingly, this Pokemon is not an evolution of Luvdisc. That said, it's still pretty cool. It's an ocean sunfish in the shape of a health representing heart, and its name is a palindrome, which is made even cooler by the fact that the scientific name for the ocean sunfish is Molamola. Today we're going to be examining how this fish fared in the competitive scene, and so we ask, how good was Alomomola actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Alomomola has always been the definition of a passive wall. With its pathetic attacking stats, it is completely incapable of actually damaging opponents directly, instead relying entirely on passive damage. However, direct damage wasn't what Mola set out to do. That would be to use its pure water typing, monstrous bulk, and ridiculous longevity from Wish and Regenerator to act as a stopgap against a ton of dangerous offensive Pokemon. It didn't necessarily need to hard wall a Pokemon in a vacuum. It was a tremendous pivot thanks to the damage offsetting nature of Regenerator, which allowed it to prevent Pokemon like U-turn spammers from making progress and forcing exploitable damage. Its reliance on passive damage wasn't a problem at all. In fact, it went hand in hand with its Wish Protect antics, and Scald and Toxic were two of the most reliable moves in the game, so Mola was consistently crippling the opposition. It was also an excellent Wish user for two reasons. One, it could easily pass wishes to its teammates because thanks to Regenerator, it wasn't reliant on staying healthy by being forced into using Protect in order to receive its own wishes. Two, its wishes were absolutely huge. Since most Pokemon had much lower HP stats than Mola, it would easily heal its teammates by huge amounts, often back up to full HP. Now, though Mola saw usage in OU once in a blue moon, it was mostly outdone by Slowbro and Slowking, whose resistances to fighting were crucial in allowing them to stave off major OU threats like Terrakion and Keldeo. They also had actual special attack stats, with which they could use Ice Beam to thwart the likes of Garchomp and Dragonite. Funnily enough, Mola was better in OU than in UU, where it struggled to match the utility of other waters like the Stealth Rocking Swampert, the Rapid Spinning Blastoise, or the Calm Minding Suicune. However, once it dropped to RU, Mola truly hit its stride, becoming one of the metagame's best, most defining Pokemon. The best way to describe its in-battle presence was suffocating. There was absolutely nothing worse than being weak to Mola, because if you were weak to it, there was no chance to outplay it like you might outplay an offensive threat. It was absolutely unforgiving. Even teams with Pokemon like Rotom-Mow, Magneton, and Sceptile that could threaten Mola had to exercise caution, lest it catch them with a Scald Burn and thus place them on a fast-ticking timer. And in a war of attrition, Alomomola would win just about every time, given its absurd longevity and how difficult truly punishing it was as a result, especially since it stonewalled some of the most dangerous Pokemon in the game, such as Choice Band Entei. Its pivoting abilities were also tremendous. It could switch into other threatening Choice Banders like Durant, Druddigon, and Escavalier. As mentioned earlier, it didn't hard counter them, but it didn't need to. It would soak up even their strongest attacks, protect for extra leftovers, and then pivot out to a teammate that could take the move, thereby removing any risk to his teammates switching in and potentially taking a different attack. It could do this multiple times thanks almost solely to the immense passive healing of Regenerator, accentuated of course by the many opportunities it would inevitably find to heal back up to full with Wish. This is why Alomomola was so monstrously difficult to play against for so much offense. It could play it safe every single time, and it would rarely be worse off for it. Alomomola was so good that many players wanted it banned. Now, while it was absolutely incredible and a consistent game-to-game performer, Mola was far from flawless. Its most directly exploitable flaw was that it was highly vulnerable to getting trapped by Gothorita. However, even this wasn't automatic, as Gothorita had to watch out for the Mola player making a good switch and pursuing it first. Of course, there were many more ways to take Mola down that didn't carry such a risk. Alomomola was bulky but not impenetrable. The common spikes severely cut into its walling ability, and several of the Pokemon it commonly switched into took to running Toxic to hinder it even further, such as Emboar and even Choice Band Druddigon. Finally, substitute Pokemon such as Jinx took complete advantage of Mola's inability to hurt them without status. However, despite the metagame evolving to try and counter it, Mola always remained a top-tier Pokemon. Amazingly enough, despite being one of the tier's best Pokemon, Alomomola wasn't even RU by usage. It was NU, and it was amazing there as well. It essentially did the same thing as in the tier above. It was an excellent check to top threats like Charizard, Tauros, and Samurott, and was tremendous team support in doing so, as well as passing its gigantic wishes. It was so similar to Aryu that just like in that tier, Mola could still be paired with a Pursuiter to eliminate a would-be trap from Gothorita. The main difference between Aryu and Alomomola was that the latter explored its surprisingly deep move pool a little more. With Magic Coat, it would turn the tables on strategies attempting to take advantage of its usual passivity, bouncing back hazards, status, and taunt. Nothing quite like trying to use spikes or toxic on a Mola and winding up spiking or toxicking yourself instead. It could also bounce back damage directly with Mirror Coat. Rotom would think it had a completely free Volt Switch, only to have the Pokemon it Volt Switch into get completely destroyed. Finally, Mola could even use Healing Wish to great effect. While it may seem counterintuitive at first to have a defensive Pokemon use a sacrificial move, this ensured that Mola would be able to contribute to its team even if it was low on health late game. Being able to bring back a battered sweeper was potentially game-changing. For example, this way it would be able to bypass Stealth Rock to revive a Charizard that would otherwise be KO'd for it. Of course, one could hardly go wrong with Mola's standard moveset. Overall, Alomomola came to redefine how players looked at defensive Pokemon. It was the essence of longevity and a shining example of how incredible the Regenerator ability could be. Alomomola was one of the most definitive 5th generation lower tier Pokemon. Early XY was littered with powerful Pokemon, Megas and non-Megas alike, that were immensely difficult to really wall by the traditional definition of the word, either immediately or over the course of a game. How did you handle such Pokemon that couldn't truly be walled if you weren't running all-out hyper offense, yet didn't want to just lose a Pokemon every time they came in? The answer was Alomomola. Between how hard it was to KO and how easy a time it had effortlessly healing up between protecting or leftovers and switching for Regenerator, it made for an excellent pivot and or temporary stopgap against many dangerous threats. It didn't hard counter them, but it didn't need to. It allowed its team to switch around them. For example, Mola was the furthest thing from a Mega Charizard wide counter, but it switched in on everything but Solar Beam, protected to stall Sun turns, could easily heal off Fire Blast and Focus Blast without actually needing to use a recovery move, and could draw Solar Beams for teammates like Heatran to switch in on, meaning it wouldn't risk getting 2-hit KO'd by Focus Blast on the switch. Zardwai couldn't exactly predict against Alomomola safely either, as it was threatened by Toxic. Alomomola enabled balanced teams to thrive in such a powerful meta by allowing players a mechanism with which they could effectively switch around such tough threats. Mola was similarly effective in pivoting around or even hard countering other top threats as well. It helped dance around Aegislash and Keldeo, was effective against Mega Charizard X, offensive Talonflame, and many variants of Greninja, and it was a great stop to Choice Band and Assault Vest variants of Azumarill and Choice Scarf Landorus Therian. It wasn't just good because it could stave these Pokemon off though. It was incredibly tough to switch into safely without suffering debilitating status, and it was also quite difficult to force out. For example, Mega Manectric's Thunderbolt didn't come close to KOing it, so if it wanted to, Mola could stay in, Toxic it, and protect for more leftovers before switching out and regenerating a ton of damage off, while Manectric would be permanently crippled. It could pull similar tricks against Life Orb Latios, that is, those variants with Thunderbolt, as otherwise it would just beat it easily. This was already valuable enough, but Mola did even more for its team by reinforcing its teammates through its enormous wishes. It was a staple on a multitude of balanced teams and was a defining factor right through the conclusion of the XY metagame. Then Oraz came around and Alomomola lost a bit of its luster. All eyes were suddenly on Slowbro, as it had been given an excellent Mega form capable of sweeping with Calm Mind, and its fighting resistance was invaluable in combating the vicious Mega Metachan. This allowed Slowbro to more easily fit on the spike stacking semi-stall teams that early Oraz gave rise to, and since Mola was near useless against these very same teams, it dropped in usage. However, it still certainly had a niche. It was a great defensive pivot for bulky offense teams that needed to take a few hits of their own, and they of course appreciated the added longevity of Wish. Mola was a terrific check to several of the new threats Oraz brought to the table. The biggest one was Mega Metagross, but it was also excellent against the terrifying Weavile and Mega Lopunny as well. It also began playing with its moveset a little bit. Turns out it didn't need Toxic as much and could make great use of Knockoff, which allowed it to hinder the Clefable that would otherwise completely blank it. It also began using Rocky Helmet as its item. It didn't truly need leftovers that much thanks to Wish and Regenerator, and this allowed it to chip the opponent even more effectively, giving its user even more play against the dangerous threats of the metagame. For example, a leftovers Alomomola might get KO'd without accomplishing anything against Mega Metachan, but with Rocky Helmet, it would leave potentially useful chip. As always, Mola helped pivot around the ever-dangerous Keldeo, and it eventually started to see use as one of the best ways to deny long-term progress against Assault Vest Tornadus Therian. It was a tougher fit, but it retained a solid place in ORAS OU. Alomomola's lack of OU usage of course sent it to the lower tiers where it had originated. It became a fixture on stall for its ability to sponge a variety of hits from top Pokemon while reinforcing its teammates' health with its huge wishes, thus playing a pivotal role in maintaining the integrity of Stall's defensive core. However, Mola had a tough time fitting on team styles beyond Stall. The tier packed a litany of top tier water types like Swampert, Slowking, and Suicune, whose utility on more balanced and offensive teams Mola couldn't consistently compete with. As a result, Mola's usage corresponded to Stall's viability in the metagame. When Stall was strong, Mola was seen quite often, but eventually the style became largely forgotten in favor of balance, and Mola more or less disappeared alongside it. It wasn't necessarily a bad Pokemon on its own, it just had tough competition. Don't feel too bad for Mola though. It returned to RU and completely dominated the tier. Its Wish, Protect, Regenerator antics shaped the metagame around it like nothing else. It staved off what felt like everything, from Delphox to Sneasel to Rhyperior to Mega Glalie. Mola had a strong argument for being the single best Pokemon in the tier. The tier's best offensive Pokemon such as Virizion were as good as they were in large part due to their positive matchup against Alomomola. Of course, it wasn't as easy as beating Mola on its own, as it came supported by other terrific defensive Pokemon, the most notorious of which was Registeel. The Regimola core was nearly unbreakable, and the few Pokemon that could threaten it both, such as Virizion, were nothing that couldn't be thwarted by another teammate, like another top tier Pokemon in Venusaur or Uxie. Balance ruled RU. Yes, balance, as this distinction is important because Mola wasn't just a cog in a stall machine. Part of the reason Mola teams were so good was that they didn't need to stall everything forever, just long enough to wear away at the opposition until their offensive weapons like Scarf Tyrantrum were ready to clean up. At this, Mola and friends excelled. Of course, they very well could outstall entire offensive teams all on their own, but that wasn't all they were good at. You might think that anything with rest would sit on such teams, but well-built Mola squads welcomed this. As soon as Mola's Toxic forced a rest, that was free entry for a threat like Choice Band Drapion. Alomomola Balance was the defining team style of ORAS RU. It was utterly dominant, largely as a result of Mola's sheer walling capability. Finally, Mola even had a small niche in Ubers. Certain stall teams enjoyed its ability to counter Ho-Oh and Extreme Killer Arceus while spreading Toxic and Knockoff, and reliably restoring the health of the recover-lacking Primal Groudon. It was a limited role, but it was a legitimate one, and overall, it was Alomomola in Ubers. That was pretty cool. Chalk up a second successful generation for the Big Wish Fish. Alomomola did not return to OU in the 7th generation, as it was completely and utterly outclassed by Toxapex. However, once again, don't feel too bad for it. It returned to UU and was once again a major contributor to Stall. This time around though, the playstyle wouldn't die out, leaving Mola to plummet to RU again. No, Stall was dominant. Between reliable defogs from Gligar, sometimes paired with additional defog from Articuno or Mega Altaria, who also brought the heal bell these teams generally needed, as well as Mola's Wish Report, these teams were thoroughly resilient against all forms of passive damage while being absurdly difficult to break through with offensive means. Even Pokemon that seem to have a good matchup on paper, such as the nasty plot trio of Celebi, Infernape, and Lucario, could be outplayed without too much hassle, especially since the stall team usually had a fast Pokemon like Nihil Eagle or Mega Aerodactyl waiting in the wings. It might seem insane that the stall would be good with the strongest Pokemon ever to touch UU in conjunction with Z moves, but it was more than good. It was excellent, so much so that it was considered outright broken by much of the player base, and a major reason for this was Alomomola. Mola shrugged off physical attackers left and right. Regenerator was particularly key in allowing Mola to switch into Crocodile and Banded Scizor all day, never relenting, constantly denying them any exploitable chip damage or ability to make relevant progress, standing up to their assault unwavering and outlasting them with ease. It could even shrug off Scarf Hydreigon easily if it desired. Sure, Draco Meteor would do a decent chunk, but a few turns of leftovers and a switch out for Regenerator, and it was as if Mola had taken no damage at all. There was variation among different types of stall teams, but they almost never went without three things that were the core of what made the style so strong. 1. Blissey. 2. An unaware Pokemon, usually Quagsire but sometimes Pyukumuku. And 3. Alomomola. Part of the reason Stall was never considered for a suspect test was that it was difficult to nail down the exact element that made it overpowered. Different players had different ideas on what needed to get the Banhammer, and while some said Blissey, many others said Alomomola, and others still said Regenerator as a whole. Whether the complaint was with Alomomola specifically or the trait it was the definitive user user of, the idea was that threats like Choice Band Terrakion were being too easily neutralized. This lack of agreement led to no action being taken, and no truly reliable counterplay arose. As a result, Alomomola and its stall friends continued to dominate through the end of the generation. Alomomola had defined tiers before, but this had taken it to a whole new level. And that's it. So how good was Alomomola actually? Well, it was easily one of the best lower tier Pokemon of all time. From its debut generation's double dominance across RU and NU, to its reign over RU among excellent stints in OU, UU, and even Ubers in Generation 6, to its pushing of Stall, the Regenerator ability, or itself, depending on who you ask, into genuinely broken territory in Generation 7's UU. Breaking through Alomomola and friends has been a challenge for generations now. It's even tougher than pronouncing its name. Now, it hasn't had much in the way of VGC success, but that's because its skill set is more singles oriented, and there's nothing wrong with that. All in all, Alomomola has a lot of allure along a long line of appearances. Thanks for watching, everyone, and shoutouts to our patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for this month's patron pick. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Alomomola? Would you buff it? What do you think is the problem with Stall? Is it itself or the Regenerator ability? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.